Ooh woo. Hello everyone and welcome to another MAX video. Today, we're going to be going through every single shadow item in the game. We're going to be ranking all 15 all the way from down here in F tier up to the S tier, going through which ones are the worst and the best. Before I get into it, a couple of things I want to explain. First of all, I'm ranking all of these items relative to the other shadow items. So some stuff is going to be in the F tier and in the lower tiers that you may think doesn't belong there. However, keep in mind that when compared against most of the other items in the game, pretty much every shadow item would be in B tier or above. And just because something ranks a little bit lower here doesn't mean it's a bad item, it just means it's not as good as the other shadow items. And since I get asked about this in every single MAX video that I do, I'm going to give a brief explanation of MPU. Now I'll try and keep it simple. MPU stands for multiplier per unit, and it basically is just an item's space efficiency. How good is an item for how much space it's taking up? And as you might expect, a higher number is better. You're just looking for higher MPU. When you're in the early game, it's not a stat that really matters that much. You're going to be looking more for just raw high multiplier items. Once you're in the mid and especially the late game, MPU becomes probably the most important statistic of an item. And it's what I generally take into account as the important factor when ranking stuff. So if you didn't know what MPU meant before, now you do. And now you know how it factors into my rankings as well. With that being said, let's get into those rankings, starting off in the F tier with what in my opinion is the worst shadow item, the Godfrogger. Now, this thing is not a bad furnace by any stretch of the imagination. It's a 10k base multiplier, which is honestly pretty good. And it definitely does have its niche uses. With that being said, once you get the Moonlight Emperor, that's basically just a straight upgrade, and pretty much always going to be better than this thing. In almost no circumstances are you going to be using this furnace over the Moonlight Emperor, whichever way it is. Moving up into the D tier, we've only got one item here as well, in the Maritime Meteorology. This item is technically a buff grader, even though it's really not. It just makes the next item that you use 4 times as good, which sounds really powerful until you remember how multiplication works, and then you remember that that basically just makes this a 48 times upgrader, and it just has a 1.9 MPU, which, again, not bad. That's a pretty good MPU. It's just not as good as some of the other shadow items. And also the fact that it's technically a buff grader, even though it's really not, pisses me off. I hate this thing. Why are you a buff grader? You're not. It's just a 48 times multiplier. It's such a pointless gimmick that does nothing, and it's just boring. This item is stupid, and it makes me mad that it hasn't been reworked yet. Did I come off as too angry? I don't actually care that much. But, anyway, moving on. Up to the C tier, we've got the Gnomic Atonement, which is a very, very slightly better upgrader than the Maritime. It's got a whopping 2 times extra multiplier, goes up to 50. That bumps up the MPU a little bit, makes it ever so slightly better. And it's also not got a stupid gimmick like the Maritime, so it instantly makes it makes me like it more. Also in the C tier, we've got the Fixture Park, which I think might actually be a bit of a controversial pick. However, let me explain. This thing is the best cell furnace in the game, and when you're early to mid-game, this thing is a hard carry, which is why I didn't just rank it in the lower tier. This thing is really good early on. However, at least for me, on easy mode, and I think for a lot of people, once you get far enough into the game, this thing just becomes entirely useless to you. Like, you get to the point where you can instantly load your setup off-rip, and at that point, you really don't need a cell furnace, because the only use of this thing is to reincarnate up the first 600 lives or whatever. And you would only do that if you need to craft stuff. Since I don't, I have no purpose for this thing anymore. However, I do still acknowledge that this thing hard carried me for a long time, which means that it's still pretty good. If you're on a higher difficulty, I would honestly rank this thing in B or maybe even A tier. It can be really powerful, just for me, it's not, so I'm ranking it a little bit lower. Moving into the B tier, we've got the Chameleon Mine. This thing is essentially just a 15 times portable. It just copies the best mine that you have on your base and gives it a 15 times multiplier. Isn't as strong of an upgrade as some of the other Shadow portables, so it ranks a little bit lower. Next up in the B tier, we've got the Oceanic Piano, which has an ability called Time Warp, which makes any time-based upgrades instant. Now, this thing allows you to use some really, really powerful items and setups that you otherwise wouldn't be able to use. The reason it ranks in B tier and not any higher is because its multiplier on its own is really bad, and it's got an absolutely atrocious MPU. Which means when you pair this with the other upgraders, you're actually not getting that crazy of an overall MPU. It's still good. By all means, it's absolutely still worth using. I mean, it's ranking in the B tier still. Like, it's good. It's just not as good as you would maybe expect initially. Moving up into the A tier, we've got another portable, the Flared Phoenix. This thing is a 30 times furnace portable, which means you have to use a mine with it. Every time an ore drops into it, it does the multiplier globally. It's not quite in the S tier for me. I think a lot of the other shadow items are just more useful overall, but it's still easy to use. It's a good portable. In a similar vein, we've got the Viral Infector. This thing is a little bit harder to use in my opinion. It's a little bit bigger and it's a beam portable, which means you have to use it right next to your setup. Definitely takes a bit more effort to find a spot for this in your setup, but if you can, it's a 45 times portable, which is really good. 45 times is a good multiplier. This thing, again, is pretty solid. Now, I'm gonna do something crazy here. Originally, when I was listing all this out, I had the Immortal Glow sitting up in the A tier. Now that I'm looking at it more, I think it's honestly a little bit worse than these other portables. I think it kind of belongs in the B tier. We're going back down a tier for the first time in Sky tier list history. Mid-video revision. The Immortal Glow? It's a good portable still. It's small, it's easy to fit in your setup, and has a big upgrade beam, but its multiplier is honestly kind of low. It starts off with a 12, and it's got Nocturnal, meaning if you don't have something that gives permanent nighttime effect, this thing is gonna be an inconsistent 12 or 24 times. That's okay, but that's not great. So again, it's not bad, but I honestly think it's a little bit worse than the other portables, and I think it belongs in the B tier. Moving back up after that slight detour, we've got the only new shadow item that's been added since the original 14. This is the 15th right here, the Forbidden Song, which is a nice little buff grader that gives Remixed. And Remixed gives a ×2 multiplier to any sound-based item, effectively. Anything that has the medley tag. And there's enough items that have medley, especially some portables, that it's actually a pretty solid upgrader, definitely worth using in your setups. It doesn't quite make it into S tier because there's not enough medley items for it to quite peak in power levels, unlike one of the other buff graders that we'll get to, but it's still really good. Definitely belongs in the A tier still. You're gonna get some good use out of this thing. And if you haven't played the game in a while and you're missing this thing, I would definitely say grind for it. Go for it, get it into your setup, it's pretty good. And now we finally move into the coveted S tier rankings, which, as is the case with a lot of these high tier item tier lists, this is the most packed area. There's 5 different items here. Because yeah, as you would expect, there's a lot of shadow items which are really good. Let's start off with the Crimson Edge. This thing gets a higher multiplier based on the amount of tags an ore has, and it goes up to 90 times, which gives it a 2.11 MPU. This is just outright one of the best space efficiency items in the game. It is incredibly powerful. Always worth using at the very end of your setup. Great item. Not much else to say. No notes. Perfect. Good. You go, girl. Can't go without mentioning the Discharged Amplifier, which is just pretty cleanly the best mine in the game. This thing, once you get it, is going to be the only mine that you use from then on out. Not much else to say. 100 sextillion value. Very good fast drop rate. Just a great mine. The Vanta Black. One of the first shadow items that got leaked before they added them. This thing is incredibly powerful. Its base MPU isn't actually anything to write home about. It's actually the same as the Gnomic Atonement, which may make you think, why the hell is this thing in the S tier? Reason being, not only is it a solid base MPU, good multiplier, it also gives night emulation and density, which is helpful for the high fructose headache. But the main thing is the night emulation, because night emulation makes it so that upgraders like the Immortal Glow, which have Nocturnal, permanently get that ×2 buff. So anything that has Nocturnal on it is now just twice as good always, instead of just at nighttime. And there's enough items that are Nocturnal that this thing is very, very powerful. Having that buff and also the density increase to pair with high fructose headache, which is another great MPU item, just means this thing has really good synergy with other stuff, and it's always going to be worth using. Next up, we've got what might be just the single best portable in all of MAX. We've got the Fetus Dragon. This thing is just really, really good. It's 150 times, and it gets buffed up by Cursed. So it can go up to a max of 150 times. It does have a 35% kill chance, which is something to keep in mind, obviously. But when you've got a setup with a lot of ores going through, and then you've got a lot of different luck boosts in the setup, and you've got shields, it really doesn't matter. that kill chance means almost nothing in the grand scheme of things. And that kill chance comes with the benefit of the best portable in the game. This thing is just really good. Easily S tier. And finally, an item almost in a class of its own. We've got the Voltage. This thing is the best buff grader in the entire game. This thing gives a ×2 buff to electric items. Again, as is the case with all buff graders, it's not a good multiplier or MPU on its own, but the amount of electric items in this game and the amount of good electric items that you're going to be using just makes this thing genuinely incredible. I mean, I've got the Ultra version of the NAND Operator, over 2 MPU. You've got the Electro Warmer, over 2 MPU. You've got the Thermo Bomb, over 2 MPU. Greek Terrarum, 1.99. You've got the Lava Beam, over 2 MPU. You've got the Meow Machine. Shit, this thing is 1.96 MPU. And all of those combined to make the best buff grader in the entire game, probably. If I'm forgetting about something, no, I'm not. It doesn't exist. But yeah, Voltage is really good, almost in a tier of its own, honestly. But everything up here is very powerful, the best of the best when it comes to shadow items. And that is my full tier list for all of the shadow items. Please let me know in the comments if you disagree with me, if you like my picks, if you think I'm an idiot or a buffoon or a genius. Any of that, please let me know. Drop a like on the video as well if you enjoyed it. Let me shout out my channel members, and then I will be on out of here. Got Atrax, Financial, Bust, Arctic, Croco, Sungaze, DeQueric, Some Person, Bestie, Ace of Dooms, Peta, Sendel, Sinise, Riley, Phantom, Fished, Blue Bowling Ball, Avoided the Spooter, Snowy, Oracle, Trey, Real Various, Noisy, Greasy, Enrique, Jimmy, 2G, Cosmic, Holiday, Neko, Mecha, Chill, Sinister, Lavels, Vizzy, Comedy, Dusky, One Though, Oof, Mini, Amber, One Star, and Adrux. Thank you guys very much for being channel members. I appreciate your support. Thank you for watching the video. If you stuck around to the end, I appreciate you. You know what? If you watched all the way to the end, leave a comment that says, banana bread. Anyway, I'm gonna go before I become more incoherent. Thank you again for watching. I will see you around, everyone.